I met Hannah Brooks in Colorado, back when the world still felt wide and forgiving. She sat 3 rows ahead of me in an elective design course, the kind I took only to fill credits before officer training. She always carried her sketchbook close to her chest, as if the drawings inside were fragile and alive. I liked that about her, the quiet focus, the way she'd squint when she worked, the faint smudge of graphite that never left her wrist. We met properly one afternoon at a coffee shop near campus. She spilled her drink and laughed, a sound that felt like warmth in a cold place. I offered napkins, she offered a smile, and something started. Not fireworks, just a slow ignition. We started talking about color theory and architecture, about the way structure could still feel human if designed with care. She said I looked like a man who needed soft edges in his life. Maybe she was right. When we got married 2 years later, it wasn't the fairy tale kind of love story, no orchestra, no crowd of witnesses. Just a courthouse, a white dress she bought secondhand, and a promise that we'd build something real. I was 28, newly commissioned, with more discipline than savings. She was 26, working freelance, her laptop always open, her fingers always chasing deadlines. We didn't have much, but we had plans, always plans. We talked about owning a house near the mountains, about raising kids who'd grow up breathing clean air and learning both structure and art, a balance between her softness and my steel. We knew it would take time. We were practical dreamers. We told ourselves that once the loans were gone, once the promotions came, once the savings grew, then we'd start our real life. Then the orders came. Deployment to Germany. 1 year. The day I told her, she stood in the kitchen holding a mug of coffee she never drank. The silence between us stretched until it became its own language. Germany? She said finally. For a whole year? Maybe less, I said. Depends on rotations. She nodded, but her eyes were already somewhere else. Calculating, adjusting, rearranging our lives in her mind. That was Hannah. Adaptable, logical. She didn't cry until later that night, when she thought I was asleep. I wasn't. I just didn't know what to say that wouldn't sound like a goodbye. 2 weeks before I left, she told me she'd move in with Lily, her best friend from college. Lily lived in a nearby city, had a spare room, and promised to split rent cheap. Hannah said it would help her save while I was gone. I told her it was a smart move. I wanted to believe that everything she did was smart, that her practicality was love in disguise. The first months apart were manageable. I threw myself into the work, drills, reports, late-night strategy briefings that blurred into one another. My days were full, my nights long. But every evening, when the noise quieted, I'd find her message waiting. Good morning, love. She sent pictures, the ones that made the distance feel smaller. Her new haircut, the pasta she'd cooked with Lily, her walks through the city park, her smile soft and honest. I told myself that meant everything was fine, that the silence, the distance, was just a test we were both passing. We talked through screens, loved through signals. She'd fall asleep mid-call sometimes, her face still lit by the phone, and I'd just watch. Those were the nights I believed in us the most. The quiet, the endurance, the promise of return. I sent her money when I could. She always said she didn't need it, but I sent it anyway. Habit, duty, love. They all felt like the same word to me back then. I tracked her expenses. Student loans, small purchases, nothing strange. Everything seemed stable. And yet, there was a distance inside her voice I couldn't name. Not cold, not sharp, just thinner. Like a thread stretched too far. Sometimes, she'd talk about Lily's coworkers, or a project she was helping with, or some new coffee shop they'd found. Her life kept moving as it should. But every detail of it made me feel like a photograph fading at the edges. Still, I didn't question it. Soldiers learn early that doubt is a kind of enemy, slow, corrosive. You silence it before it silences you. One night, I told her about the snow in Stuttgart, how it fell like dust, how the whole world turned gray for hours. She said it sounded beautiful. Then, quiet, I wish I could see it with you. It was the kind of thing she used to say a lot, but lately those words had become rare. I replayed them for weeks. Time blurred after that. Days became rotations, rotations became months. I kept her letters printed out, folded in the same order I received them. When my unit moved east, she mailed a small package, cookies, a photo of us from our wedding, and a note that said, "Keep this close when things get hard." I did. I kept it in my breast pocket like a relic. There's a certain peace that comes before everything changes, a kind of false calm that feels like safety but is really just blindness. I was living inside that peace, writing her letters, counting days, believing that love, once made honest, could endure anything. And maybe it could have if both people had kept their hands on the same rope. I remember one night near the end of winter. I called her after a long patrol, exhausted, craving her voice. She answered, but the background was loud. Laughter, music, the clatter of glasses. I asked where she was. She said Lily was hosting a few friends, nothing big. "Do you want me to call back?" I asked. She hesitated. "No, it's fine. I can talk." But her voice was distant, distracted. I heard someone, a man maybe, say something to her. She laughed. The sound wasn't for me. After we hung up, I sat there staring at the screen until it dimmed. Then I tucked the phone under my pillow and told myself not to read into it. People are allowed to laugh. People are allowed to live. Still, that night, sleep wouldn't come. I walked outside into the cold. The stars over the base looked close enough to touch, but I felt impossibly far from everything I loved. The wind carried that strange ache that soldiers learn to recognize, the kind that tells you something back home is shifting, even if no one says it out loud. I tried to shake it off, to bury myself in duty, but it stayed. It stayed in every quiet morning, every letter that felt shorter than the last, every unanswered text that came with an excuse. I told myself I was imagining things. That stress does that. Makes you suspicious, fragile, foolish. Still, I felt the foundation moving beneath me. Slowly, invisibly. And somewhere across the ocean, Hannah was learning to live without me. And I, without realizing it, was learning how to lose her. That was the calm before the storm. The stillness before the truth starts knocking. I just didn't know it yet. The first sign of distance isn't silence. It's politeness. That's what I learned somewhere between my 6th and 7th month overseas. Hannah's messages were still coming, but they began to read like form letters. Short, careful, edited. "How was your day? Hope training went well. Stay safe." No warmth, no rhythm, just sentences that sounded rehearsed. I told myself she was tired. She was working longer hours now, picking up freelance gigs, building her portfolio. She sent me photos of her new designs, and I always made sure to reply with admiration, even when something in them felt off. Too bright, too filtered, too staged. It wasn't until she posted a picture online that I felt something twist inside me. A group photo from Lily's apartment. Everyone holding drinks, all smiles, casual chaos. But my eyes found one detail and couldn't move past it. There was a man beside her, arm resting on the back of her chair, body angled just slightly toward hers. Caleb Moore. I didn't know his name then, but I would soon. At first, I dismissed it. Men stand close to women all the time. Friends, co-workers, acquaintances. But there was something in the way Hannah leaned toward him. Not much, just enough to register as comfort. A familiarity I didn't recognize. I told myself not to be jealous. Jealousy was beneath me. Jealousy was weakness. But jealousy is also instinct, the body's way of recognizing a trespass before the mind does. Our calls grew shorter. She said the time difference made it hard to stay awake. She stopped asking about my day, about the people I served with. I started filling the silence with stories she didn't ask for, as if I could talk us back to what we were. Then came the excuses. Missed calls. Unread messages. "Sorry, I was out with Lily. My phone died. Work's been insane." Always soft, believable lies. Took me a while to admit that the tone of her voice had changed. When she said my name, it sounded like an obligation. When she said "I love you," it sounded like punctuation. Something tacked on because it used to belong there. Still, I held the line. Soldiers hold lines, that's what we're trained for. One evening, I sent her a message during downtime. Something simple. "I miss you. Can't wait to come home." She replied hours later, "Don't rush. You're doing something important." I stared at those words for a long time. They were kind, but distant, the way you'd speak to a stranger who just told you about a dream. Then came the second photo. Another group sh*T, same apartment, same crowd. But this time it wasn't Lily who posted it. It was Caleb. His page was public. I clicked out of curiosity and felt my stomach drop. Dozens of pictures, parties, dinners, walks downtown, and Hannah was in half of them. Always nearby, always comfortable. He was handsome in that effortless way that men without duty often are. Hair too long, smile too confident, clothes chosen to look unchosen. A man who's never had to prove anything the hard way. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe he was just part of their friend group. Maybe I was projecting. But the part of me that survived deserts and drills and sleepless nights knew better. The smallest cracks are always the beginning of collapse. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I started paying attention. Military families have a shared mobile plan, a convenience I never questioned. She rarely used it beyond calls and texts. But one night, out of something between fear and curiosity, I opened the usage logs. The numbers told their own story. Dozens of late-night texts to a new contact. Frequent calls that lasted hours, always after midnight, always after she said goodnight to me. The name beside the number, Caleb Moore. I sat there for a long time, the light from the monitor cold against my face. I felt something that wasn't quite rage, more like recognition, like finding out the enemy had been inside the camp all along. I waited a week before I acted. Maybe part of me hoped the pattern would change. Didn't. I started reading messages through the shared backup service. A feature I'd forgotten even existed until that night. I shouldn't have looked. But once you suspect betrayal, you can't unlearn the hunger for truth. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Their messages weren't just flirtation. They were int** Macy disguised as casual conversation. Affection in half sentences. Secrets exchanged through emojis and inside jokes. Mentions of late drives, of coffee runs, of us. And then one message that stripped away all doubt. Sometimes I forget what it felt like to be alone. You make me feel like home. Her words. Her voice in text. I read it over and over until the screen blurred. I didn't throw anything. Didn't shout. Soldiers learn to control the body first, the mind later. I just sat there, breathing slow, feeling the world narrow to a single point of betrayal. When I finally stood, my hands were steady. I looked around the barracks, at the rows of photos pinned by men who still believed someone was waiting for them. I wondered how many of those smiles were already lies. Over the next few days, I functioned on muscle memory. Woke up, trained, ate, slept. My mind was elsewhere. Not in Germany, not in the uniform, but in that small apartment back in Colorado, where my wife was building a life I wasn't part of. A few of her texts arrived during that time. Miss you. Hope you're okay. Love you always. Every one of them landed like a bullet made of paper, soft but deadly. I started noticing her language shift even further. We became I. Home became the apartment. She stopped calling me by my name. Just babe or hey you. Words that mean nothing when they come from guilt. The worst part wasn't the infidelity. It was the clarity that followed. I realized that while I'd been building a future, she'd been building an exit. Every payment I made, every plan I drafted, every call I looked forward to, it all fed into a version of her life where I was slowly fading out. When she sent me her last package, a postcard, a scarf, and a note that said, "Stay safe. I'm proud of you." I didn't cry. I just folded it, placed it beside the others, and knew the words no longer belonged to the woman who wrote them. The next day, I logged back into that account. There were new messages waiting. Caleb again. This time, they weren't careful. "You'd make a great mom someday. I already feel like we're a family." And her reply, "I want that too." I closed the laptop. The sound of the click echoed in the quiet. There it was, the end. Not a dramatic confession, not a fight, just data. A love story rewritten in code and cowardice. That night, I walked to the edge of the base, where the forest began. The wind moved through the trees like whispers in a language I no longer believed in. I lit a cigarette, my first in years, and watched the smoke rise, gray against the darker sky. I thought about everything I'd given her. Every letter, every promise, every piece of myself trimmed down to make room for her comfort. And I realized something brutal. Love doesn't die when someone cheats. It dies when they stop caring whether you find out. By the time dawn came, my decision was made. I would not confront her. Not through anger, not through begging. I would return power to the only place it belonged, to myself. Because there are two kinds of men in betrayal stories. Those who demand explanations, and those who write endings. I had chosen my role. And the next part, the collapse, would be quiet, clean, and final. There's a certain calm that follows betrayal. It's not peace. More like the stillness after a detonation, when the dust hasn't yet realized it's falling. I lived in that calm for weeks, performing my duties, answering orders, existing inside a hollowed-out version of myself. I didn't drink. I didn't rage. I just planned. The military teaches you that survival is about discipline, not emotion. So that's what I applied to my marriage procedure. I started by making lists, not of memories but of logistics, joint accounts, insurance, legal documents, passwords. Every thread connecting her life to mine. Each one became a target for severance. The first cut was financial. I froze the shared checking account, redirected my pay to a new one. I told myself it was temporary, a precaution. But even then, I knew it was permanent. Next came the phone plan, the insurance, the automatic payments for her car, her subscriptions, her comfort. I sat in the barracks one quiet evening, calling each company in turn. My tone was calm, professional, almost detached. To the clerk who asked if everything was okay, I said, "Just simplifying." Simplifying. That word felt clean, controlled. When I was done, I stared at the confirmation emails, rows of finalities stacked like quiet graves. Every click felt like reclaiming oxygen. I didn't tell her. I wanted silence to do the talking. A week later, she messaged, "Hey, my card's acting weird. Did the bank update something?" I stared at the screen, thumb hovering. Then I typed, "I'll look into it," and never did. 3 days after that, the car insurance got canceled. "Is there a mix-up?" I didn't answer. Then the tone shifted. "Ethan, please, I'm getting calls from billing. Can we talk?" Talk. That word again. It used to mean connection. Now it sounded like intrusion. I let her messages pile up, unopened. I told myself this was strategy, not cruelty. She had made her choices. I was simply adjusting to them. The truth came out faster than I expected. A friend from Colorado, one of those mutuals who keeps quiet until the damage is done, sent me a *T. Hannah and Caleb, tagged in a photo together. His hand on her waist. Her caption read, "Some things just feel right." It was posted on a Tuesday. The same day she'd texted me, "Miss you." I didn't reply. I didn't confront. I didn't even unfollow her. I wanted her to see that I'd seen it, that my silence had weight. 2 nights later, I received an email from my commanding officer. It was brief, formal, but the name inside it froze my blood. Caleb Moore, listed as a relative of the colonel overseeing my division. A nephew, distant but connected enough to matter. For a moment I thought about revenge. A quiet report, a whisper through official channels. One word could have ruined him. But the older I get, the more I understand that vengeance isn't power. Detachment is. So I said nothing. Instead, I filed for transfer. Japan. A longer deployment, more distance, fewer ghosts. By the time the papers were processed, Hannah's world had already begged *N to collapse. Mutual friends reached out. She and Caleb were taking a break. He'd left her apartment. She'd lost her job contract after missing deadlines. Money was tight. The tone of her messages changed from confusion to desperation. "I just want to understand. Can we talk? Please. I made mistakes, but you don't have to hate me." I didn't hate her. Hatred implies connection, and connection was the first casualty. Still, the human part of me, what was left of it, checked the shared account one last time before closing it for good. The balance was nearly empty. She had drained it in the final weeks, probably without even realizing she was burning the last bridge. The night I left Germany, I burned her letters. Every page. The ink curled and blackened. The paper turned to ash that floated like snow. I expected it to feel cathartic. It didn't. It just felt quiet. When I arrived in Japan, the air itself felt different, salt and steel, the scent of new beginnings. I moved into base housing, unpacked the essentials, and hung nothing on the walls. I wanted emptiness. I wanted control. For months, I worked like a man trying to erase himself. Long hours, extra shifts, volunteer assignments. Anything to stay in motion. The body heals through exhaustion. The mind follows eventually. The messages kept coming, though. New numbers, fake accounts, mutual friends acting as messengers. She wanted to talk. She wanted to apologize. She wanted closure. But closure isn't a conversation. It's a door you close quietly and never reopen. I didn't block her right away. I wanted her to see the read receipts. Wanted her to know I'd seen her name, her words, and chosen silence. That's what betrayal deserves. Not rage, not confrontation, but indifference sharpened into finality. One evening, after a long training exercise, I found a package waiting in my quarters. No return address, but I knew her handwriting. Inside, a framed photo of our wedding day, a letter folded neatly behind it. I didn't open it. I carried the frame outside, placed it on the ground, and stepped back. The ocean wind came strong that night, tearing through the base. When the frame fell, the glass shattered cleanly, scattering the reflection of the moon. I left it there. Weeks passed before I heard from her again. This time, the message wasn't a plea. It was simple. I'm pregnant. I read it 3 times. Then again. The words blurred, but not from emotion, from disbelief at how predictable it was. I didn't respond. Not then, not ever. The dates didn't align, and even if they had, my trust was already buried. Later, through a mutual friend, I learned Caleb was gone. No calls, no support, no claim of paternity. Hannah was alone. She'd moved back in with her parents, trying to rebuild the life she'd dismantled. I should have felt vindicated. I didn't. All I felt was distance, the kind that stretches so far it erases both blame and love. One night, while walking along the docks, I thought about her message, about the child, about the strange, merciless cycle of cause and consequence. And I realized something. Sometimes justice doesn't look like punishment. It looks like absence. By then, my divorce papers had already been filed. The process was clean, efficient. No alimony, no shared assets. I'd left her everything she could still lose. When the final document arrived, confirmation of dissolution, I sat on my bunk for a long time, the paper trembling in my hands. Not from regret, from relief. It was over. She reached out one last time after the baby was born. She sent a picture, a small, soft face wrapped in white. She wrote, "He deserves to know who you are someday." I looked at the photo until it blurred, then deleted it. He didn't need to know who I was. The man she'd betrayed was already gone. All that remained was a name on a uniform, a heartbeat that refused to break, and the quiet certainty that some endings don't need witnesses, only distance. Japan became my second skin. The first months blurred together. Early mornings, salt air, the clang of distant machinery, the rhythm of work that left no room for thought. I slept in narrow quarters, ate quickly, trained until my muscles ached. I told myself that discipline could replace faith, that order could fill the space where love had once lived. The silence here was different. It wasn't the tense, waiting kind I'd known in Germany. It was clean, honest. When the base quieted at night, I could hear the ocean breathing, steady and ancient. I learned to match my own breathing to it, to let the tide wash over what remained of the man I'd been. I kept no pictures on my desk, no reminders, only a single card tucked into a drawer, my deployment orders folded and worn. They reminded me that movement, not memory, kept me alive. In time, work became more than distraction. It became refuge. I volunteered for every assignment, every long shift. My superiors noticed. Promotions came, slow at first, then steady. Each new rank was like a layer of armor replacing the one love had stripped away. The men under my command started calling me Steady Walker. They meant it as respect, but I heard the irony in it, as if they could sense the weight behind the calm. They didn't know that steadiness was just another kind of scar. Months turned into a year. The paperwork from the divorce arrived quietly. A manila envelope slid under my door. No fanfare, no closure, just ink and finality. I signed the last page, sealed it, and sent it back. That night, I sat on the pier until dawn, watching cargo ships move across the horizon like slow-moving thoughts. For the first time, I felt empty in a way that wasn't painful. Just still. The messages from home stopped eventually. Hannah must have realized I wasn't going to respond. Mutual friends said she had the baby, a boy. I didn't ask for details. I didn't want to know his name, his weight, his eyes. Curiosity is a form of weakness when it reaches backward. There were days when I imagined the child growing up and asking questions. Who was he? What was he like? Maybe she'd tell him I was a soldier, that I lived far away. Maybe she'd leave out the rest. The betrayal, the silence, the self-inflicted exile. That was fine. I didn't want to be remembered. Not by them. Instead, I began to rebuild. Not the way people mean when they talk about healing. My version was quieter, practical. I started running again. Long, punishing routes along the coast until my lungs felt raw. I learned to cook small meals to find comfort in solitude. I took language lessons not to speak fluently, but to understand the sounds around me. I filled notebooks with words that meant peace, patience, and release. Sometimes, at night, I'd walk through the narrow streets of the town outside base. Lanterns hung above the shops, casting soft light on strangers' faces. I liked watching people who weren't haunted. Couples laughing, old men playing cards, children chasing each other through alleys. Their simplicity was foreign to me, but it reminded me that life continues, indifferent and endless. One evening, a fellow officer invited me to dinner with his family. His wife cooked too much food. Their little girl tried to teach me origami, and for a few hours I forgot to measure my words. When I left, the officer clapped my shoulder and said, "You're welcome here any time." That night, back in my room, I realized how strange it felt to be welcomed without condition, to be seen without needing to pay for it. In the months that followed, I started writing again. Nothing elaborate, just fragments, journal entries, lists of things I wanted to remember and things I wanted to forget. Writing became a kind of confession, but without an audience. Every sentence was a small release, a way to keep from calcifying completely. I wrote about Germany, about the night I learned what betrayal sounds like, quiet typing through a phone screen. I wrote about the morning I canceled everything that tied her to me, about the exact moment I realized love, without respect, is just charity. And then I wrote about Japan, the long shadows of dawn, the scent of rain on metal, the way freedom doesn't always feel triumphant. Sometimes it feels like absence you've learned to accept. The first time I laughed again, truly laughed, was 6 months later. A young recruit misread a map during training and led the entire convoy in a circle for an hour. When he realized, he looked at me in horror, expecting punishment. But something broke loose inside me, and I laughed. Deep, real, unrestrained. The sound startled me. It had been years since I'd heard it. Afterward, I sat alone in my quarters and wondered if that's what healing looks like. Not joy, but the ability to feel something honest without it hurting. One night, I received an email from a mutual friend back home. Short, hesitant. "Hannah asked if she could send you something. She said it's not to ask for help, just to say thank you." I stared at the message for a long time before replying, "Tell her not to. There's nothing left to send." I didn't mean it cruelly. It was simply truth. The ledger between us was balanced. My loyalty for her betrayal, my silence for her regret. Every debt settled. By the second year, Japan no longer felt foreign. The rhythms of the base became predictable, the streets familiar. The ache that used to follow me like a shadow began to dissolve into routine. I still thought about her sometimes. Not with bitterness, just curiosity, the way you think about a house you once lived in and barely recognize now. I kept the same morning ritual. Wake before sunrise, pour black coffee, sit by the window, watch the light spill over the bay. It became a form of prayer, though I no longer believed in anything but time. When people asked about my past, I kept it brief. Married once, I'd say. Didn't work out. The words carried no pain, only distance, like describing a dream that belonged to someone else. Years from now, if someone were to ask me what I learned, I'd tell them this: endings don't announce themselves. They arrive quietly, in the middle of ordinary days, disguised as small decisions. A canceled payment, a deleted message, a closed door. And by the time you realize you've survived, you're already someone new. I don't know where Hannah is now. Maybe she remarried. Maybe she's alone. Maybe the boy is old enough to ask questions she doesn't want to answer. None of that belongs to me anymore. What does belong to me is peace. Not the dramatic kind, but the slow, earned kind. The kind that comes from knowing you finally stopped trying to fix what was never yours to hold. Sometimes, on rare nights when the wind carries the scent of pine and ocean together, I think about Colorado, the coffee shop, the girl with the graphite on her hands, the vows we whispered without knowing what they'd cost. I let myself remember her laugh, just once, and then I let it go again. The past is not a wound. It's a landscape you leave behind. So I wake each morning, lace my boots, and step into a life that no longer needs redemption. The horizon stretches wide, unburdened. The air tastes like salt and mercy. And in the silence that follows, I hear the truth I'd spent years chasing. Not every ending is tragedy. Some are deliverance. Was I wrong to let it all go? Or was this the only way to be free?